Hello everyone, welcome back to IGCSE. Today we'll be looking at the character of Slim from Of Mice and Men, once again going straight through an essay plan perfect for a GCSE or IGCSE standard. So, without further ado, the first thing about Slim is that he's an anomaly to the typical farm worker because of the fact how he exerts a large amount of kindness, and this is just almost challenging the stereotypical perception of ranch workers, because many of my earlier videos have looked at the nature of this itinerant migrant farm worker who's a cold person due to their isolation and the lack of income to sustain someone else. But unlike other farm workers, Slim actually shares workers' feelings and emotions. He helps them, and he earns his authority through respect and kindness. And this quote here, as you see, "I seen the guys that go around on the ranches alone. That ain't no good. They don't have no fun. After a long time, they get mean." And therefore, he's just seen as a man of great experience. He understands, he consoles many workers, and this can be seen as how he's been trusted by George as he explains to them, the truth behind why George and Lenny left Weed, sorry, and he's the only character that doesn't talk to Curly's wife with hostility, as in Slim here. And furthermore, he doesn't actually have any racial prejudices. He never discriminates against crooks at a time, where laws like Jim Crow laws result in a lot of segregation. And this kind of adds to the whole AO4 historical context where you can link in the kind of racial segregation, the Jim Crow laws, the lack of rights, and counter that with how Slim doesn't, necessarily show racism towards crooks. And therefore, clearly, Slim, basically, the key thing about him is he earns his authority through kindness, and this kindness from Slim is just challenging that stereotypical perception of the itinerant farm worker or the migrant worker during the Great Depression. And therefore, he's seen as a strong moral character and a role model. In the second paragraph, we're going to add on. So here we got the great power and authority that I was talking about. So he's introduced in great descriptive detail. Someone who's a natural born leader. He's admired by everybody. This can be seen how he's seen as the prince of the ranch with godlike eyes, and how Slim's word were law. His authority, in fact, was so great that his word was taken on any subject, be it politics or love. And therefore, the fact that, again, it just shows that kind of power and authority. The description of him just shows that he's a bit different to the other farm workers. He has a sense of purpose on this ranch, because he's seen by how he's a jerkline skinner, which is basically a skilled position, and therefore he's a lower risk of losing his job on the ranch. Hence, he benefits from this kind of long-term job. Hence, he's able to share workers' feelings, and therefore he's able to wield authority by gaining the respect of his colleagues. His description makes him seem very revered, and therefore he doesn't even fear being canned, because even Curly, the boss's son, respects him, meaning that Slim has more power than the boss's own son. And basically, that's why this can be seen, when Wit says he better leave Slim alone. Nobody don't know what Slim can do, in a reference to Curly and Slim. And therefore, Slim uses his authority for good reason when he aids Lenny by telling Curly that his arm got stuck in a machine, preventing Lenny from being canned. So clearly showing that, that kind of quote, the Slim's words was law, and therefore Lenny's basically saved from potentially being canned after he broke Curly's arm. And therefore, Slim represents this kind of practicality of ranch workers during the Great Depression, and you can talk the historical context by building on the whole theme of migrant itinerant workers. So remember, in paragraph 1 we looked at the impact of crooks and that racial prejudice. Here we look at the historical context, the nature that during the Great Depression, the nature of the migrant worker meant that you're always moving from place to place. There's no kind of chance to build relationships, but here Slim basically challenges this stereotype by Steinbeck. So that's an interesting kind of point, I think. And finally, Slim is seen as someone who's intelligent and where advice can be taken. That yes, he exerts authority, but he's also seen as someone to gain advice from. And this can be seen by how Slim's input will be needed for really any final word that's made on the ranch, because at the end of the day, his decisions were law. And it's Slim that prevents any further protest from Candy when his dog's about to be shot. And hence, as he said, the dog ain't no good to himself. So clearly, and it was only after this that Candy's dog was shot, clearly showing that it's Slim's word was law, again building that to that earlier quote. But Slim does exert kindness by telling Castle to take a shovel so the dog can be properly buried. And this kind of builds on the sense that his intelligence, generosity and kindness is portrayed as well from Slim. And this is really further seen when his dog Lulu gives birth to 9 puppies, but he drowned 4 of them right off, because there's enough food for the others. represented this pragmatic nature, again building on this kind of pragmatic nature of the itinerant farm worker. And therefore, Steinbeck deliberately presents Slim as a sensitive and thoughtful character in order to challenge the perception of ranch workers who, during the Great Depression, were seen to be selfish because they only cared about themselves due to the paranoia almost being canned. And many of them were migrant workers, they couldn't afford relationships, as seen by that quote from George, maybe could have even had a girl. And therefore, Slim basically is here as almost a complete contrast to the sense of like how the ranch was in terms of the loneliness, the isolation, and the harsh nature. And even Steinbeck, for example, Steinbeck calls the place name Soledad, which is actually Spanish for lonely. But all of this stereotypes is challenged by the character of Slim, and this I think should be the underlying point with any essay when it comes to Slim. And yep, that's what I had for Slim. Again, that historical context, you can look at the whole name of the itinerant farm worker, the migrant workers, the impact of the Great Depression, the lack of income, and if you want to add a bit of crux, as I said in paragraph 1, talking about the racial prejudices. So therefore, thank you very much for listening, and yeah, feel free to like and subscribe, and we'll hopefully finish off with an essay plan, on Curly, and then we can get straight into the themes. So yeah, thank you.